Pick it up. That 50 cents is worth more than the dignity your mother earned in 18 years cleaning this hotel." Richard Whitmore III sneered, tossing the coin against Maya's worn shoes. The banquet hall went dead silent, but Maya Williams did not lower her head. She looked straight into the arrogance of the wealthy hotel owner and said, "Keep it. You'll need it to buy this hotel. Back when I'm done with you." Richard burst out laughing and motioned toward the crowd around them. "You think you've got a brain? Fine. One game of chess. You win. I hand over this entire hotel. You lose. You and your housekeeping mother pack your things and get out tonight." Ruth Williams trembled as she gripped her daughter's hand. "Maya, please don't." But Maya pulled her hand free, walked through the ring of cameras and stunned faces, and sat directly across from the billionaire. 10 moves, she said, her voice hard enough to freeze the room. "That's more than enough to bury your kingdom." Richard's smile vanished. The banquet hall erupted into a frenzy as reporters and investors instantly swarmed the chess table, cameras locking onto the two opponents. Richard dropped into his chair, eyes sharp. "You're making a mistake, girl." Maya didn't look back. "No, I'm just refusing to pick up your garbage." The words reached the crowd cleanly. A few people shifted. One reporter whispered into a microphone. Richard heard it, and his eyes sharpened. He had meant to embarrass a maid's daughter, not give her a line people would remember. Behind them, Ruth stood frozen, her hands gripping her apron in pure terror. She had spent 18 years staying invisible in this hotel, but tonight, the spotlight was blinding. He turned to Ruth and smiled as if she were part of the entertainment. "Don't look so worried. If your daughter has half the skill she has attitude, maybe you'll retire rich." Ruth's lips parted, but no answer came. Richard leaned closer to Maya. "Of course, if she loses, I'll make sure security escorts both of you out through the service entrance. Seems appropriate." Maya did not blink. "You keep talking about doors because you're afraid of the one you just opened." That struck the table harder than a slammed fist. Richard slammed a white pawn onto the wood. "Your mother eats because my signature allows it. Keep that mouth shut." Maya raised her chin. "Then, write your last signature, because your power ends tonight." A murmur passed through the crowd. Not loud, not brave, but real. Richard looked around and saw something he did not like. People were no longer watching Maya as a joke. They were watching him as a risk. "Thomas," Richard called without turning his head. "Since you're standing there with that old grandmaster reputation, make yourself useful. Witness this." Thomas Reed stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. He had been silent until then, watching Maya more closely than Richard. A few nights earlier, he had seen this same young woman correct a position on Richard's display board with one precise touch. Most people looked at chess pieces. Maya had seen the truth of the position. Thomas had not forgotten. "If there is a wager," Thomas said, "state it clearly." Richard laughed. "Gladly. I, Richard Whitmore III, put control of the Whitmore Grand on this game. If Maya Williams beats me, she takes control. If she loses, Ruth Williams is terminated tonight, and both of them leave this property before midnight." The words hit Ruth harder than the coin had hit the floor. One of the board members stepped forward. "Richard, perhaps we should—" Richard cut him off. "No. Let them record it. Let everyone record it. I want no confusion when the maid's daughter loses." The reporters closed in tighter. The guests stopped pretending they were not listening. Somewhere near the front, Eleanor Brooks, the investor Richard had spent months courting, watched without expression. She had come to finalize a deal. Now she was watching a man gamble away not only a hotel, but the judgment she was supposed to trust. Maya glanced at Ruth. Her mother's face was pale, her eyes wet, but she did not reach for Maya again. That small restraint said more than permission. It said, "I am afraid, but I will not make you kneel." Maya turned back to Richard. "Set the board." A staff member moved to arrange the pieces, but Maya lifted one hand. "No, he can do it." Richard's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me? You said it was your hotel, your board, your kingdom." Maya leaned back slightly. "Set it up yourself." The room tightened around them. Richard smiled with his teeth. "Fine. Richard aggressively set up the board, wood slamming against wood. Thomas Reed stepped between them. Standard rules. No clocks. Begin. Richard slammed his pawn forward. Move 1. Center control. Maya matched him instantly. Move 1. Threat neutralized. Richard sneered, immediately swinging his queen out in an aggressive, bullying attack. Move 2. Power goes where it wants. Maya developed her knight calmly, blocking the threat. Thomas Reed's eyes narrowed. Richard noticed. Something to say already? Thomas kept his gaze on the board. Only that she saw it. Richard's jaw tightened as Maya's knight blocked his queen. Blinded by anger, he took a side pawn she intentionally left exposed. Move 3. I take back what's mine. He gloated, holding the pawn up. Ruth closed eyes. Maya's hand went to her next piece. Thomas Reed leaned closer. Richard saw him and laughed. Don't tell me she meant to do that. Thomas answered softly, but the microphones caught it. I'm beginning to think she means all of it. Maya lifted her knight and placed it on a square Richard had not considered. For the first time that night, the hotel owner stopped smiling, and Maya Williams, the maid's daughter he had tried to price at 50 cents, looked across the board and said, "That was 3. You have 7 moves left to understand what you just walked into." Richard stared at the knight, as if the piece had insulted him personally. It sat there in the middle of his position, small, calm, and deeply inconvenient. A moment earlier, he had been laughing with a captured pawn raised between his fingers. Now that same hand hovered above the board without purpose. Moving the same knight twice? Beginner panic. Richard sneered, his hand hovering over the board in unexpected hesitation. Maya locked eyes with him. Then punish it, sir. Thomas Reed stepped closer, his silence louder than any commentary. She didn't panic, Richard. Thomas whispered. She trapped you. He turned his attention back to Maya. You know what your mother used to do when guests left coins on the nightstand? She brought them down to lost and found. Every nickel. Every dime. 18 years of that kind of obedience. He leaned in. And now her daughter thinks she can take a hotel. Ruth flinched. Maya did not. My mother returned what wasn't hers, Maya said. You built a life taking credit for what wasn't yours. Richard's face flushed as the crowd whispered. Desperate to regain control, he aggressively swung his bishop out. Move 4. Real pressure. Something your kind should understand. Maya looked at the bishop, then at Richard's queen, then at the king he had left sitting in the center. His attack looked large to anyone counting threats. To Maya, it looked unfinished. Thomas Reed shook his head. You exposed your king just to steal a useless pawn. You aren't attacking, Richard. You're overreaching, Maya added coldly. You're collecting crumbs while your roof caves in. Richard slammed his palm on the table, the wood rattling. Enough, he said. You are here because your mother could not finish a shift without dragging you in to carry towels. Do not talk to me about roofs. I own the roof over this room. Maya's eyes lifted. For now. Ruth watched in awe. This was the exact trap Maya's grandfather, Papa Sam, used to call the servant's door a fatal blind spot that arrogant men never bothered to notice until it was too late. Richard tapped his bishop. Your move, Miss Williams. Or are you waiting for your mother to clean the board first? Ruth's eyes filled, but this time she did not look away. As Maya slid her dark squared bishop across the diagonal, Thomas Reed stood fully upright. If this moment makes you stand with Maya, the young woman who dared to rise when her mother was disrespected, please like this video to show your support for Maya, and comment below where you are watching Maya's story from, your city or state, because someone near you might be following Maya's journey right now too. Eleanor Brooks stepped forward, ignoring Richard's protests. Mr. Reed, is he in danger? He's done, Thomas replied cleanly. Her knight cuts off his escape, her bishop locks the diagonal, and his queen is too far away to save him. It's a forced mate. Richard laughed, but it came out dry. Standing close to losing against her, Maya said, against your own choices. That one hurt him. Everyone could see it. Richard leaned over the board, searching for a way to regain the room. Then he looked at Ruth, because cruelty had always been his safest weapon. You hear her? He said. This is what happens when workers forget gratitude. I let you stay employed long past the point anyone else would have bothered. I kept you on when your hands slowed down. I signed the papers that kept your insurance alive. And this is the thanks I get? Ruth swallowed, but her voice came out clearer than before. My work kept me here. Richard's head turned. It was the first time Ruth had answered him all night. Maya looked at her mother, and something softened for half a second in her face. Richard pointed at Ruth. Do not start pretending you found a spine because your daughter made a few lucky moves, Thomas said. Richard, play the board. I am playing the board. No, Thomas said. You are playing your prejudice and calling it strategy. The sentence cut through the room. A reporter repeated it instantly. Someone near the back said, Did he get that? Another voice answered. Everyone got that. Richard heard them. His face changed. Not fear exactly. Something worse for a man like him. Exposure. He turned back to the board and grabbed his knight, moving it toward his king in a hurried attempt to create protection. The move looked sensible. It blocked one line. It gave him something to point at. It let him speak again. There, Richard said. Covered. Thomas closed his eyes for one beat. Maya watched the knight land. Richard saw Thomas's reaction and barked. What now? Thomas opened his eyes. You closed the last door. Richard froze. Maya's hand hovered over her pieces, but she did not move yet. She let him look. She let him search. She let the silence stretch until the whole room understood that Richard Whitmore III, the man who had tossed a coin at her shoes, was now trying to find shelter on a board he claimed to own. His voice lowered. You said 10 moves? Maya looked at him. You stood there, Richard said, grasping at the only thing left that sounded like control. You said 10 moves. Maya's fingers touched her knight. I gave you 10, she said. You only needed 5 to destroy yourself. Maya lifted the knight. No one spoke. The piece looked almost harmless between her fingers. No taller than Richard's thumb, no heavier than the coin still lying near her shoe. But every eye in the room followed it, as if it carried a verdict. Richard leaned back, trying to look amused. You're bluffing. Maya did not answer. Say something, he snapped. She looked at the board, not at him. I already did. Then she placed the knight down. The sound was soft, just wood touching wood. But Ruth Williams felt it in her chest. Maya let her hand fall back to her side. Checkmate. Richard stared at her. No. Thomas Reed bent over the board, his eyes widening. Confirmed, Thomas whispered, his voice cutting through the dead silence. There is no escape, Richard. Your queen is stranded. Your bishop is pinned. And your own soldiers have trapped your king. It's a smothered mate. Maya's voice was quiet. 5 moves. Richard looked up sharply. You said 10, he said again. But now it sounded weaker. Not like an accusation. More like a man trying to argue with the weather. Maya met his eyes. I said 10 was enough to bury your kingdom. I didn't say I needed all 10. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. Then Thomas Reed straightened. Confirmed, he said clearly. Checkmate. In 5 moves. The banquet hall erupted. Applause shattered the silence as staff, reporters, and guests cheered in unison, completely ignoring Richard's status. Maya remained seated, her eyes locked on the billionaire. Richard rose halfway from his chair. Enough. The applause weakened, not because anyone respected him, but because everyone wanted to hear what he would do next. This is absurd, he said. It's a trick. A party trick. Thomas looked at him. It is chess. Richard pointed at Maya. She was coached. Maya tilted her head. By a man you would have walked past. I don't care who taught you, Richard snapped. No one hands over a hotel because a maid's daughter memorized a cheap trap. Thomas's eyes hardened. Be careful. Richard laughed once. Short and ugly. Or what? You'll lecture me about honor? No, Thomas said. I'll remind everyone that you stated the wager clearly, twice, in front of witnesses. Richard turned toward the crowd. This was entertainment. Everyone here knows that. No one laughed. That silence did more damage than any answer could have. Eleanor Brooks stepped forward then, holding the investment folder against her side. She did not rush. She did not raise her voice. She had spent decades in rooms where powerful men mistook volume for strength, and she had learned to let them finish destroying themselves before she spoke. "Richard," she said. He turned to her quickly, relief flashing across his face because he still believed business could rescue him from shame. "Eleanor. Good. Tell them. Tell them. This is ridiculous." She looked at the board first, then at Ruth, then at Maya. Only after that did she look at Richard. "The investment agreement is cancelled." The words landed harder than checkmate. Richard froze. "What?" "The agreement," Eleanor said, each word precise, "is cancelled." A board member behind him went pale. "Miss Brooks, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No," Eleanor said. "He made his judgment public. So will I." Richard stepped away from the table. "Eleanor, don't be foolish. We spent 6 months on that deal. You spent 6 months earning my confidence," she said. "You lost it in 5 moves." The reporters caught every word. Richard's face flushed. "This is not about chess. This is about your toxic leadership and lack of judgment, Richard," Eleanor replied coldly. "You gambled your hotel to bully a sick employee on camera. You are a liability." Richard turned to his board members in panic. "Say something." Martin Hale, the board chairman, stepped forward, his face pale. "Richard, you did this to yourself on live television, and there are cameras on you. Right now." That was when Richard seemed to notice them again. Reporters, guests, investors, staff. The whole room had become a witness box. Every face held a different kind of judgment. He lowered his voice. "Turn the cameras off." No one moved. "Turn them off," he barked. Thomas Reed spoke before anyone else could. "That is not how truth works, Richard." Maya finally stood. The room quieted around her without being asked. She bent down and picked up the 50-cent coin. For one horrible second, Richard thought she was obeying him at last. Then, she placed it on the edge of the chessboard beside his trapped king. "Here," she said. "You threw this at my feet because you thought it measured us." Richard's breathing grew heavy. Maya pushed the coin gently toward him. "Keep it. You may need something small enough to match what is left of your word." Richard furiously slapped the coin away, sending it skittering across the floor. Eleanor closed her folder, turning her back on him. Martin Hale immediately pointed at Richard. "The board is holding an emergency vote to strip your executive powers, Richard. Effective immediately." Ruth stepped toward Maya at last. "Maya," she whispered. Maya turned, and the steel in her face softened. Ruth touched her daughter's cheek with a hand that had scrubbed floors, folded sheets, carried towels, and hidden pain for 18 years. "I told you not to do it," Ruth said, her voice breaking. Maya nodded. "I know. I was scared. I know." Ruth looked at the board, at Richard standing alone behind it, at the reporters closing in, at the staff who no longer looked at the floor. Then, she looked back at her daughter. "But your granddaddy," Ruth whispered. "He would have loved that night." For the first time that night, Maya smiled. Not for the crowd, not for the cameras, only for her mother. Behind them, Thomas Reed studied the final position one last time and said softly, as if speaking to the board itself, "A clean mate. Not lucky. Not memorized. Clean." Richard heard him. His voice came low and bitter. "This is not over." Maya turned back. "No," she said. "It's just the first honest thing that happened tonight." Richard's words hung in the air, but they no longer carried the weight he expected. For most of his life, when Richard Whitmore said something was not over, people treated it like a warning. Lawyers took notes. Managers changed schedules. Employees lost sleep. Tonight, the sentence landed in front of cameras, witnesses, and a chessboard, where his king had nowhere left to go. Maya did not answer him again. She had already said enough. Martin Hale, the board chairman, moved quickly toward the side of the room with 2 other directors. Their voices dropped, but not low enough to hide panic. "Get legal on the phone. Now," Martin said. "And tell security not to touch the Williams family. Nobody goes near them without my approval." Richard turned sharply. "Your approval? Richard, you just lost the investment agreement on live television." Martin snapped. Richard panicked. looking at Eleanor Brooks. "Eleanor, please. Let's step into my office and handle this privately." Eleanor didn't move an inch. "I don't do business with men who humiliate their staff's children for entertainment. Your investment is dead." The words struck Ruth so unexpectedly that she looked down at her name tag, as if reminding herself it was still there. Richard saw the gesture and made the mistake of smiling. "Ruth has been paid for every hour she worked." Ruth raised her head. Maya turned slightly, ready to speak for her, but Ruth touched her arm, not to stop her this time, to say, "Let me." "My hours?" Ruth said. Richard looked irritated. "Yes, your hours." Ruth stepped forward, her voice dead calm. "For 18 years, you cut my hours when I was sick, forced me to work double shifts, and took money from my checks for things your guests broke. You called us invisible. He did it to all of us." A kitchen server shouted from the back. The crowd erupted in agreement, overlapping voices finally breaking their silence. Thomas Reed looked at the board. "This is no longer a circus, Richard. This is the consequence." Martin Hale turned to the other directors. "We need the emergency resolution drafted immediately." Richard stared at him. "You wouldn't dare." Martin's voice was low. "I would rather dare tonight than explain tomorrow why the board allowed you to remain in control after this." A reporter stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, do you intend to honor the wager?" Richard pointed at him. "Get out of my hotel." The reporter did not move. "Is that a no?" Richard looked around for security, but the security manager stood near the entrance, frozen between old orders and the new reality. He had worked under Richard for 12 years. He knew what Richard wanted. He also knew every camera in the room would record him doing it. Maya saw the hesitation and understood. Power was not disappearing. It was being recalculated. Eleanor closed her folder and handed it to her aide. "My team will notify the bank that our capital commitment is withdrawn. Given the pending refinancing deadline, I imagine the board understands the urgency." Martin's jaw tightened. "We do." Richard's anger broke through again. "You came here to make money, Eleanor. Don't pretend you found religion in the middle of a chess game." Eleanor looked at him with a calm that made his shouting seem smaller. "I came here to invest in a hotel. I found a man who turned a due diligence event into a public liability." He laughed bitterly. "Liability? That's all people are to you?" "No," she said. "That's what you became to them." For the first time, Richard had no immediate reply. Maya looked at Ruth. Her mother's breathing was uneven, and the emotion of the night was beginning to take a physical toll. Maya pulled out a chair. "Mama, sit." Ruth shook her head. "I'm all right." "Mama." That one word carried more authority than a shout. Ruth sat. Richard noticed and tried to regain some ground. Touching. But sitting in a chair doesn't make her a lady of the house. Maya faced him. "No. 18 years of work did that. You were just too small to see it." A low sound moved through the room again. Not applause yet. Approval, restrained but growing. Thomas Reed looked at Maya in awe. "You saw the mate in 5 from his second move, didn't you?" "After his third move, it was over," Maya replied, staring directly at Richard. "He was too busy insulting my mother to see his own grave." Martin's phone rang. He answered, listened for a few seconds, then looked at the other directors. "Council is joining by video." They saw the live stream. Richard went still. "They saw what?" Martin did not soften the blow. "Everyone is seeing it." One of the younger directors held up his phone. His face had gone pale. "The clip of the coin is already spreading." Richard took a step toward him. "Give me that." The director stepped back. No, that small refusal did something to the room. It proved Richard could be denied. Ruth saw it. Maya saw it. Richard saw it most of all. The staff flooded the floor, standing shoulder to shoulder with Ruth. Martin Hale aggressively slid a legal document across the table. "Under the emergency conduct clause, the board is officially suspending your executive authority, Richard. Effective immediately. Your leadership is a financial disaster." Eleanor added, "You need it." Richard looked from Martin to Eleanor, then to Thomas, then finally to Maya. "This is theft." Maya shook her head. "No. Theft is taking something from someone who never agreed to give it. You agreed in front of everyone. Richard's mouth twisted. You think you can run a hotel? No, Maya said. Not alone. But I know people who have been running it from the back halls while you took credit in the front. Ruth closed her eyes again. But this time the tears slipped down her cheeks freely. Thomas Reed picked up the black knight Maya had used for Checkmate and placed it gently back on its square. That, he said, may be the first good management answer I've heard tonight. Martin set the legal pad down in front of Richard. Until formal documents are prepared, we need a written acknowledgement that you made the public wager, lost the game, and will comply with the board's emergency transition. Richard did not touch the pen. The cameras moved closer. Maya looked at the coin under the chair, then back at him. You told me to pick it up. Richard's eyes burned. She pushed the pen toward him. Now, you pick up yours. Richard looked at the pen as though it were a weapon placed on the table for him to use against himself. For a few seconds, no one moved. The board members watched him. The reporters watched him. The staff watched him with the stillness of people who had spent years being told not to stare. Ruth sat with one hand pressed against her chest, breathing slowly, while Maya stood beside the chessboard with her eyes fixed on the man who had thought a coin could make her kneel. I am not signing a damn thing in the middle of a ballroom, Richard snarled, shoving the pen back. Martin Hale leaned in close. Then we record your refusal, call an immediate press conference, and let the world know you quitted a legally witnessed wager. Choose your next move wisely. A reporter near the front spoke up. Mr. Whitmore, did you or did you not say that if Maya Williams won, she would take control of the Whitmore Grand? Richard pointed toward him. I will have your press access revoked. The reporter did not step back. That sounds like you don't want to answer. A murmur moved through the room again. Richard's eyes swept over the crowd, hunting for one friendly face, one old ally, one person who still understood that he was Richard Whitmore III, and this was supposed to mean something. He found board members looking at their phones. He found investors whispering with aides. He found staff members standing taller than they had 10 minutes earlier. He found Eleanor Brooks watching him with the quiet finality of a door being closed. You're all enjoying this, he said. Eleanor answered, No, we are assessing it. Richard sneered. Business language. Convenient. It is business, Eleanor said. Every lender, investor, and partner connected to this hotel is going to see that clip before breakfast. The question is whether they see a board acting immediately or a board protecting the man in the video. Martin nodded once, as if she had said what he needed said aloud. He turned to Richard. Sign the acknowledgement. Richard looked down at the legal pad again. And if I don't? Martin's jaw tightened. Then the board will proceed without your cooperation, and your refusal will be attached to the emergency minutes. Richard leaned over the table. You think minutes can take my hotel? Maya spoke before Martin could. No. Your mouth did. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of people deciding whether to breathe. Richard's hand closed into a fist. You have no idea what you're touching. Maya stepped closer to the table. I touched 5 pieces. That was enough. Blinded by fury, Richard swept his arm across the board, crashing the pieces onto the floor. There. No position, no proof. Maya didn't even flinch. She pointed directly at the dozens of cameras surrounding them. Every single phone recorded it, Mr. Whitmore. You cannot sweep away the truth. Ruth covered her face again, but this time her shoulders moved with a small, broken laugh. It escaped before she could stop it. Maya heard it and almost turned, but she kept her focus on Richard. This was not over yet. Men like him did not stop because they were wrong. They stopped when every exit closed. Martin slid the legal pad forward again. Sign. Richard stared at the restored board. He hated it. Everyone could see that. He hated the little black knight most of all, sitting there like it had a right to occupy space in his kingdom. Patricia Lowell, another board director, stepped forward. Lenders are threatening to pull out, and corporate counsel is screaming about legal exposure. Sign the paper, Richard. Your pride has already bankrupted you. Eleanor took one step forward. I'll make this simple. If Richard does not sign an acknowledgement of emergency transition before I leave this room, my public statement will say the board refused to act after witnessing misconduct. reckless wagering of control, and retaliation against an employee's family. Martin exhaled through his nose. That would destroy us. No, Eleanor said. Richard started that work. I would only describe it. The pen lay between Richard and Maya. Ruth stood slowly. Maya reached to help her, but Ruth shook her head. She walked to the table without looking at Richard first. She looked at the chessboard, the legal pad, the pen, then finally the coin still half hidden beneath a nearby chair. Mr. Whitmore, she said. Richard's expression twisted. What now? For 18 years, I signed whatever you forced me to sign because I was afraid of losing my job, Ruth said, stepping up to the table. Tonight, your signature won't make a lie true, Richard. It will just keep you from burying the truth. Richard looked away from her. That was his first surrender. Not the signature. Not yet. Just the refusal to meet Ruth's eyes. Maya saw it, and so did the room. Martin pushed the pen one final inch. Richard. For once, no one else spoke. Richard picked up the pen. The sound of it leaving the table was small, but every camera caught it. He bent over the legal pad. His hand paused above the page, and for a moment Maya thought he might throw the pen too. Instead, he wrote his name with hard, angry strokes. Richard Whitmore III. When he finished, Martin took the pad immediately and handed it to Patricia. Scan it. Send it to counsel. Now. Richard dropped the pen. You think that means she owns anything? Martin replied. It means you no longer decide what happens next alone. Maya said. That's the first improvement. A few people laughed, but softly. The night had moved beyond mockery. Richard stood and pulled at his jacket. This hotel will crawl back to me. You all will. Every one of you. Because when the cameras leave, someone still has to run the place. Maya looked at the staff gathered behind him. Housekeeping, kitchen, laundry, maintenance, security, front desk, people who had spent years making the hotel function while Richard took credit for its shine. They already do, she said. Richard followed her gaze and saw them. Really saw them. Perhaps for the first time. Because now they were not moving around him. They were standing against him. The security manager stepped forward. His voice was careful but firm. Mr. Whitmore, the board has asked that you leave the event floor for the evening. Richard stared at him. You work for me. The man swallowed. I work for the hotel. Ruth closed her eyes, as if those 5 words had lifted a weight off the floor itself. Richard looked once more at Maya, and in that look was all the hatred of a man who had not simply lost property. He had lost the right to define the people in front of him. This is not justice, he said. Maya picked up the 50-cent coin from beneath the chair. She held it in her palm for a moment, then placed it on the table beside the signed acknowledgement. No, she said. It's just the bill coming due. Richard had no answer left. As security escorted him away, the crowd parted without touching him. No one bowed their head. No one laughed on cue. No one rushed to rescue his pride. By the time he reached the doors, the only sound following him was the steady click of cameras and the low voice of a reporter saying, Richard Whitmore has just signed an emergency transfer of authority after losing a public wager to Maya Williams, the daughter of longtime housekeeper Ruth Williams. Maya heard her mother's name spoken clearly. Not housekeeping, not the maid, Ruth Williams. She turned and found Ruth crying silently. Mama, Maya said. Ruth shook her head and smiled through the tears. Let me hear it again. Maya understood. So did Thomas, who turned toward the nearest reporter and spoke with deliberate care. The woman you are asking about, Thomas said, is Ruth Williams. She gave 18 years to this hotel. Tonight, her daughter reminded everyone what that was worth. Ruth pressed a hand to her mouth. Maya reached for her. This time, when mother and daughter held each other, the room did not feel like a place they had entered by mistake. It felt like a place that had finally been forced to make room. For a long moment after Thomas said Ruth's name, nobody knew what to do next. The gala had been planned with a schedule. Speeches at 9, investment announcement at 9:30, champagne toast at 10, a photographer near the sponsor wall, a statement for the morning papers. Richard Whitmore III had built the evening to end with his name on every tongue. It did, just not the way he intended. Martin Hale took control first, because someone had to. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, stepping near the chess table, his voice uneven but formal. "The board will issue a statement shortly. The event is concluded for tonight." No one moved toward the exits. Martin tried again. "Please allow our staff space to work." That sentence had a different sound now. Staff, not background, not furniture, people. The word moved through the room and made several employees look at one another as if they had heard a door unlock. "Is Maya Williams in control now?" a reporter shouted. Martin Hale hesitated, sweating under the lenses. "An interim authority has been acknowledged. She will be represented." "Recognized," Eleanor Brooks corrected sharply, stepping over. "Cut the legal jargon, Martin. She wins. You recognize her." Plain English. Martin swallowed hard. Recognized. Maya did not smile. She did not know yet what control of a hotel meant. She knew what it did not mean. It did not mean turning into Richard with a different face. It did not mean standing on the necks of the people who had cleaned, cooked, lifted, fixed, folded, guarded, and smiled through pain. Ruth sank into a chair, her legs trembling from the long shift. Maya stood firmly beside her as Patricia Lowell frantically babbled into her phone nearby, demanding emergency counsel. The cameras kept rolling. The public arena that Richard had used to humiliate them was now demanding immediate accountability. Eleanor saw Maya's face change. She approached without crowding her. "Maya." Maya stood. "Miss Brooks, Eleanor is fine." Maya showed her head. "Not tonight. Tonight, I need to remember who everyone is." Eleanor studied her, then nodded. "Fair enough. You should have counsel before you sign anything else or agree to anything. I can recommend someone independent. Not mine. Not the board's." Martin looked over. "We can arrange representation." Eleanor glanced at him. "That is exactly why she needs independent counsel." Maya looked from one to the other. "I'm not signing anything tonight." Martin's eyebrows lifted. "Miss Williams, we may need—" "You needed my mother quiet for 18 years, Maya said. "You needed Richard calm for 6 months. You needed investors happy tonight. I understand what people need when money is afraid." Her voice stayed even. "I said I'm not signing anything tonight." Thomas Reed's mouth moved almost into a smile. "Good move." Martin's face flushed, but he did not argue. Ruth reached for Maya's hand. "Baby, what happens now?" Maya looked at the room. Staff still stood in clusters, uncertain whether they were allowed to leave, speak, or believe what had happened. Guests were slowly filtering out, but reporters remained. The chessboard stood in the center, restored, with the coin beside Richard's signature. It looked less like a game now, and more like evidence. "I don't know everything," Maya said. Then she turned toward the staff. "But nobody gets fired tonight." A housekeeper near the service entrance covered her mouth. A kitchen worker muttered, "Lord, thank you." Martin stepped forward. "That is not formally within." Eleanor cut him off. "It is an excellent temporary public position." Maya looked directly at Martin. "Say it." He blinked. "Say what?" "That nobody on staff is being fired tonight. Not my mother. Not anyone who spoke. Not anyone who clapped. Not anyone who recorded." Martin looked at Patricia. Patricia nodded once. Martin faced the room. "No employee will be terminated tonight for anything related to what occurred here." Maya did not look away. "Or tomorrow." Martin exhaled. "Or tomorrow." A quiet wave passed through the staff. Not celebration, relief. The kind that comes when people realize they can sleep without waiting for a punishment call. Ruth squeezed Maya's hand. "You didn't have to do that first." "Yes," Maya said. "I did." A reporter raised his voice. "Maya, what do you plan to do with the hotel?" Maya turned toward him. The question was too big, and he knew it. He wanted a quote, a headline. A young woman thrown into power before midnight. She answered anyway. "I plan to listen to the people who know how it runs." The reporter pressed. "Do you mean management?" "I mean the people who make beds, wash towels, fix pipes, cook food, carry luggage, calm, angry guests, and still get called by their job title instead of their name. The staff went still again. Maya continued, "If this hotel survives, it will not be because Richard Whitmore owned it. It will be because they kept it alive when he was too busy admiring his reflection in it." Thomas looked at the final board position and murmured, "Accurate." Eleanor gave the smallest smile. Martin rubbed his forehead. "We will need to coordinate statements," Maya said. "Start with my mother's name." Patricia, still holding the signed acknowledgement, looked up. "The statement can say the board recognizes Ruth Williams's 18 years of service and regrets the treatment she received tonight." Ruth shook her head quickly. "No, don't make me a charity sentence." Patricia stopped. Ruth stood again, slower this time, and faced the group of directors. "If you are going to say anything about me, say this. I worked here 18 years. I did my job. I trained people. I came in when others called out. I stayed late when rooms weren't ready. I did not need pity. I needed respect." Maya whispered, "Mama." Ruth did not stop, and I was not the only one. "Put that in the statement," a maintenance man shouted, stepping forward. The entire staff pressed closer, their voices overlapping in a sudden wave of demands. Eleanor leaned toward the overwhelmed chairman. "This is the sound of your new reality, Martin." Maya turned to the staff. "Tomorrow, I want a list. Not complaints shouted into a room. A real list. Pay issues, safety issues, medical leave, broken equipment, managers who retaliate, everything." A cook called out, "Who do we give it to?" Maya looked at Ruth. Ruth's eyes widened. "Me?" Maya said. "They trust you." Ruth shook her head. "I clean rooms?" "No," Maya said gently. "You know this hotel." That was when Ruth cried again, but she did not cover her face this time. Thomas Reed picked up his coat and looked at the black knight on the board. "You played a masterpiece, Miss Williams. Don't let them change your game." As the reporters scrambled to file their breaking updates, the remaining staff stood tall, refusing to hide in the back halls anymore. Maya walked to the chess table and picked up the 50-cent coin. She wiped it once with her thumb, then slipped it into her pocket. Ruth watched her. "Why keep that ugly thing?" Maya looked toward the doors Richard had disappeared through. "Because one day, somebody else is going to need to see how little he thought we were worth." Ruth nodded slowly. "And what will you tell them?" Maya took her mother's hand. "I'll tell them he was wrong." Ruth's hand felt smaller in Maya's than it had an hour earlier. Not weak, just tired. The kind of tired that came from years, not one bad night. As the last guests drifted toward the exits and the reporters gathered sound bites near the doors, Maya walked her mother away from the chess table and toward a quiet corner near the staff entrance. For the first time since the coin struck her shoe, nobody tried to stop them. A young server named Luis stepped aside quickly. "Mrs. Williams, do you need water?" Ruth looked at him as if the question itself surprised her. "I'm all right, baby." "You're not," Maya said. Luis was already reaching for a bottle from a service tray. "Here, please." Ruth accepted it with both hands. "Thank you." Luis nodded, then looked at Maya. His voice dropped. "You really did it." Maya glanced back at the board. "He helped." Luis almost smiled. "I saw that part." Across the room, Martin Hale stood with Patricia Lowell and two other directors, while a laptop was opened on a cocktail table. Emergency counsel had joined by video. Their voices were tight, professional, and worried. Words floated across the room in fragments. Fiduciary duty, public exposure, transitional authority, temporary operations, media statement. Maya heard them all and understood only enough to know that Richard's signature was not the end. It was the beginning of people trying to decide what her victory was allowed to mean. Eleanor Brooks approached with 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed one to Maya. "It's not good coffee." Maya took it. "That makes it familiar." Eleanor's expression softened. "You handled yourself well." "I played a game." "No," Eleanor said. "You changed the room. The game was just how you did it." Maya looked at Ruth, who was sitting with the water bottle in her lap, and her eyes on the floor. "The room still has to change after everyone leaves." That is the hard part, Eleanor said. Maya studied her. Are you staying because you care, or because Richard gave you a cleaner way out of a bad deal? Eleanor did not flinch. Both can be true. Maya appreciated the honesty more than comfort. Then don't talk to me like I'm a headline. I won't. Good. A commotion broke near the main doors. Richard had not left the building entirely. He stood just outside the event floor with 2 security officers and a man Maya recognized as his personal attorney, Daniel Price, a sharp-faced lawyer who had often walked through the staff halls without looking at anyone. Daniel was speaking fast, one hand raised toward the cameras. My client made no enforceable transfer, Daniel said. Any suggestion otherwise is irresponsible. Mr. Whitmore was participating in a social exchange during a private event. Thomas Reed, who had been standing near the chessboard, turned slowly. Private events usually do not include reporters. Daniel ignored him. The board's actions are premature. Richard saw Maya watching and raised his voice. You hear that? Premature. That's the first intelligent word spoken in this room since you sat down. Maya did not move toward him. Ask him if Checkmate was premature too. The nearest reporter repeated the question instantly. Mr. Price, was the Checkmate premature? Daniel's mouth tightened. This is not about chess. Thomas stepped in before Maya could. That is the second time someone has said that after losing at chess. A few people laughed, but Daniel continued. The so-called wager involved control of a corporate asset. There are governance procedures. There are legal limitations. There are documents. Maya nodded. Then you should be grateful. Richard signed one. Richard's face darkened. That paper means nothing. Patricia Lowell lifted the scanned acknowledgement from beside the laptop. Counsel disagrees enough to keep talking. Daniel looked toward the board members. You are exposing yourselves. Martin Hale answered. Richard exposed us. We are trying to stop the bleeding. The bleeding? Richard said. You make it sound like I committed a crime. Ruth stood before Maya could stop her. You hurt people because you were used to calling it management. The room quieted again. Even Daniel turned. Richard's lip curled. Ruth, don't overestimate what happened here. Ruth stepped forward, still holding the water bottle. I spent years underestimating what happened here. That was how I got through it. Maya felt something move through her chest. Pride, fear, and grief braided together. Ruth's voice was not loud, but after 18 years of silence, every word seemed to carry its own history. Daniel tried to regain control. Mrs. Williams, with respect, this is an emotional moment. Ruth looked at him. With respect, Mr. Price, I have been called emotional every time I told the truth, in a room that preferred paperwork. Eleanor's eyebrows lifted. That should be in the statement. Maya almost smiled, but Richard stepped forward as far as security allowed. You people are making a mistake. Tomorrow morning, when the cameras want a new story, you will still have bills. You will still have payroll. You will still need someone who knows what he's doing. Maya walked toward him then. Not fast, not angry. Ruth reached for her, but did not stop her. You think knowing what you're doing means owning the building, Maya said. My mother knows which rooms flood when it rains. Luis knows which guests leave without tipping and still expect smiles. Maintenance knows which boiler lies on the inspection sheet. Laundry knows how many towels go missing and which manager blames staff for it. The cooks know when the food budget got cut, but the banquet prices went up. You know how to stand in front of cameras and call all of that your success. Richard stared at her. The crowd around them grew still. Maya continued. So yes, tomorrow morning, there will be bills. But for the first time, the people who understand the work will be allowed in the room where decisions are made. Daniel spoke quickly. That is a nice speech. It is not governance. Maya turned to him. Then teach me governance. But don't confuse vocabulary with wisdom, Thomas Reed murmured. Another clean move, Richard snapped. This is not a game anymore. Maya looked back at him. It never was to us. Martin's phone buzzed again. He checked it and paled. Local news is running the coin clip. Patricia looked at her own phone. National pickup is beginning. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. Richard saw it and rounded on him. Fix it. Daniel lowered his voice. Richard, you need to stop talking on camera. That was the first useful advice Daniel had given all night. Richard looked as if he might refuse, but security had shifted closer. The power around him was no longer obeying instinctively. It was calculating risk. That made him more dangerous, but also more alone. Eleanor turned to Martin. Issue the statement now. Short. No excuses. Martin looked at Maya. We should include you. Maya shook her head. Include Ruth first. Ruth whispered. Maya, I don't need. Yes, Maya said gently. You do. And so do they. She looked toward the staff, still gathered near the service doors. Martin took a breath and began dictating to Patricia. The Whitmore Grand Board of Directors acknowledges tonight's incident involving Richard Whitmore III, Maya Williams, and longtime employee Ruth Williams. Effective immediately, Mr. Whitmore's executive authority is suspended pending formal review. The board recognizes Miss Williams's public wager victory and will establish an independent transition process with representation for Maya Williams and employees of the hotel. Maya raised a hand. Not incident. Martin blinked. What? Don't call it an incident. That makes it sound like a spill someone cleaned up. Eleanor nodded. Use misconduct. Patricia typed. Martin swallowed. Tonight's misconduct, Maya said. And don't say longtime employee like she was a chair that stayed in one room. Ruth gave her a warning look through tears. Maya softened, but did not back down. Say 18 years. Martin corrected it. Ruth Williams, who has served this hotel for 18 years. Maya nodded. Better. Richard laughed from the doorway, but it was a thin, desperate sound. Listen to yourselves. Taking orders from her now? Martin looked at him. No, Richard. Taking corrections. That finished the statement. Patricia sent it. For a few seconds, no one reacted. Then phones began buzzing across the room at once, one after another, as the statement hit inboxes, newsrooms, group chats, and staff phones. A laundry worker read it aloud quietly. When she reached Ruth's name, her voice cracked. Ruth sat down again. Maya knelt in front of her. Mama? Ruth pressed one hand over her name tag. 18 years, she said. They finally wrote it down. Maya took her other hand. They should have written it a long time ago. Ruth looked past her toward Richard, who was now being guided farther from the room by security and his lawyer. Maybe, she said. But tonight, they had to. Thomas Reed came near the chess table and picked up the Black Knight once more. Miss Williams. Maya looked up. He held out the piece. The hotel owns the set, I assume. But for tonight, I believe this belongs with you. Maya accepted the knight. I already have one piece to remember my grandfather by. Then keep this one to remember yourself. Maya closed her fingers around it. Eleanor checked the time. You and your mother should leave before the press blocks the exits. Maya stood. Through the front? Ruth looked startled. Eleanor's answer was immediate. Through the front. Maya helped her mother rise. Staff members parted for them, but not the way people had parted for Richard. There was no fear in it, only respect. As they reached the main doors, a reporter called, Maya, what do you want people to know? Maya stopped with Ruth beside her. She thought of the coin, the board, Richard's voice, her mother's name in the statement, and the strange weight of the knight in her palm. She answered, Don't wait until someone powerful calls it justice. Tell the truth when it is still expensive. Then she walked out with her mother through the front doors of the Whitmore Grand, leaving Richard's kingdom behind them. Not buried yet, but no longer standing on unchallenged ground. The front doors closed behind Maya and Ruth, but the night did not let them go quietly. Outside, the hotel entrance was lined with reporters who had rushed from local stations after seeing the live stream. Their questions came all at once, bright and sharp, carried over camera lights and the low rumble of cars pulling up along the curb. Maya, did Richard Whitmore really sign over control? Mrs. Williams, how long have you worked here? Is it true the investment deal collapsed? Who taught you to play chess like that? Ruth tightened her grip on Maya's arm. For 18 years, she had left this hotel through side doors, loading docks, employee corridors, places built for people who made things work, but were not meant to be seen. Now she stood at the front entrance, with cameras pointed at her face and microphones carrying her name into the night. Maya felt her mother's hand shake. She stopped walking. The questions kept coming. Maya lifted one hand, one at a time. The firmness in her voice did what security had failed to do. The reporters quieted. Not completely, but enough. A woman from Channel 6 stepped forward. Maya, people online are calling tonight a historic upset. What do you call it? Maya looked back through the glass doors. Inside, staff were still gathered in small groups, reading the board's statement on their phones. I call it overdue. Another reporter leaned in. Did you intend to take control of the hotel when you sat down? No, Maya said. I intended to make him stop talking about my mother like she was something he owned. Ruth's eyes filled again, but she did not look away from the cameras this time. A man with a press badge turned to Ruth. Mrs. Williams, what do you want people to know about your 18 years here? Ruth opened her mouth, then closed it. Maya waited. She did not answer for her. Ruth drew a slow breath. I want people to know I worked. That's all. I worked when I was tired. I worked when I was sick. I worked when my hands hurt. I worked when nobody said thank you. And there are people inside that building who did the same. The reporter nodded. Do you feel vindicated tonight? Ruth looked at Maya, then at the hotel. I feel seen. Vindicated might take longer. That answer silenced them more than any polished speech could have. A black sedan stopped near the curb. Eleanor Brooks stepped out from the hotel entrance behind them, her phone still in her hand. That's enough for tonight, she told the reporters. Mrs. Williams needs rest, and Miss Williams needs counsel before anyone turns her life into a headline. Maya gave her a sideways look. I can speak for myself. Eleanor nodded. I know. I'm speaking to them. That was fair enough. Thomas Reed came out a few steps behind Eleanor, carrying his coat over one arm. Miss Williams, he said, your mother should sit down soon. Ruth gave him a tired smile. Everybody keeps telling me that tonight, because everybody can finally see you standing, Thomas said. Ruth did not know what to do with that, so she only nodded. Eleanor's driver opened the sedan door. Let me take you home, Eleanor said. No cameras, no questions. Maya hesitated. Pride told her not to accept help from someone who had come to do business with Richard. Common sense told her Ruth was close to breaking from exhaustion. Ruth settled the matter. Baby, I am not getting on a bus tonight. Maya almost laughed. Then we'll take the ride. The reporters called after them as they got into the sedan, but the door closed on the noise. For the first time in hours, there was quiet. Ruth leaned back against the seat and shut her eyes. Maya watched the hotel shrink through the window. Its sign glowed above the entrance. She had seen that sign hundreds of times from bus stops, sidewalks, and service doors. Tonight it looked different, not because the building had changed, but because the fear around it had cracked. Thomas sat in the front passenger seat. Eleanor sat across from Maya and Ruth. For a few blocks, no one spoke. Then, Ruth opened her eyes. What happens to him? Eleanor did not pretend not to understand. Richard? Ruth nodded. The board will keep him suspended. Counsel will try to limit damage. His lawyer will argue the wager is not enforceable the way it sounded on camera. The public will argue otherwise. The lenders will care less about chess and more about whether the hotel can survive the scandal. Maya touched the black knight in her pocket. So he can still fight it. Yes, Eleanor said. But he can't make tonight disappear, Ruth whispered. Men like him always find a way to come back. Thomas turned slightly from the front. Not always. Ruth looked at him. Thomas continued. Some men only look unbeatable because people resign before the endgame. Maya looked down at her hands. I don't know anything about running a hotel, Eleanor answered. Good. People who think they know everything are how we got here. That's not very comforting. It wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be true. Maya studied her. You always talk like that? When I'm tired. Ruth gave a faint smile. Then you must be exhausted. For the first time that night, Eleanor laughed softly. The sedan turned onto a quieter street. Maya could feel the night catching up to her. The anger that had held her upright was fading, and beneath it came something heavier. Tomorrow there would be lawyers, reporters, calls, Headlines, strangers judging her voice, her hair, her mother, her age, her right to sit at that table. There would be people saying she was brave. Others would say she was arrogant. Some would say Richard was joking. Some would say Ruth should have kept her daughter home. The world always found a way to put the burden back on the people who survived the insult. Ruth opened her eyes again. Maya, yes, ma'am. You scared me half to death. I know. I wanted to pull you out of that chair. I know. But when you sat down, Ruth stopped, searching for the words. For a second, I saw your granddaddy. Maya swallowed. Ruth reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded tissue. Inside was an old wooden queen, dark, chipped at the crown. Maya stared at it. You brought it? Maya asked. Ruth nodded. I found it in your drawer last week. I was going to fuss at you for still carrying old things around like they could protect you. Maya took the queen carefully. Ruth's voice softened. Then tonight, I thought maybe some old things do. Maya closed her fingers around the piece. The black knight from the hotel was in one pocket. Papa Sam's queen was now in her palm. One piece from the battle, one from the man who had taught her how to survive it. Thomas looked back and saw the queen. May I? Maya passed it to him. He examined it with respect, not like an antique, not like a curiosity, but like something that had earned its wear. This piece has seen real chess, Ruth said. My father played every Sunday after church, sometimes for $5, sometimes just for pride. Thomas handed it back. Pride is a dangerous stake. Maya looked at the queen. So is dignity. The car stopped outside the small apartment building where Ruth and Maya lived. Eleanor's driver stepped out, but Maya opened the door herself. The air felt colder now that the cameras were gone. Eleanor lowered her window. I'll have an independent attorney call you in the morning. You do not sign anything before that. Maya nodded. I won't. Thomas leaned across from the front. And if anyone asks you how you saw the mate? Maya waited. Tell them Richard showed it to you, he said. Ruth chuckled under her breath. That sounds like something my father would have liked. Maya helped Ruth onto the sidewalk. Before closing the door, she looked back at Eleanor. Why are you really helping? Eleanor did not answer immediately. My mother cleaned offices at night when I was in college. She used to say, the richest buildings in America are full of people no one notices until they stop working. Maya held her gaze. Eleanor added, tonight, your mother stopped being invisible. I'd like to see what happens if the hotel learns from that. Maya closed the door gently. The sedan pulled away. Inside the apartment, Ruth sat at the kitchen table and finally took off her shoes. Maya put water on for tea because that was what Ruth always did when the world became too much. The television in the next apartment was loud enough to hear through the wall. A news anchor said Richard Whitmore's name, then Maya's. Ruth looked toward the sound. Maya set Papa Sam's queen and the hotel knight on the table between them. Ruth reached for her daughter's hand. Tomorrow's going to be heavy. Maya nodded. Ruth squeezed once. Then tonight, we breathe. Maya sat across from her mother, the coin still in her pocket, the pieces between them. And for the first time all night, she let herself exhale. Morning came without mercy. By 7 o'clock, Maya had slept less than an hour. Ruth had not slept much more. The tea had gone cold on the kitchen table. The television next door had finally quieted, and the two chess pieces still sat between them like witnesses that refused to leave. Maya stood at the sink, washing a cup she had already washed twice when Ruth's phone started buzzing. Then Maya's phone. Then the apartment landline, the one Ruth kept because she still believed a real home ought to have a phone that stayed in one place. Ruth looked at all three sounds and said, Lord have mercy. Maya dried her hands. Don't answer. Ruth pointed at the landline. That one could be the clinic. Maya picked it up. Hello? A man's voice rushed in. Is this Maya Williams? This is Carter Bell with National Morning Desk. We'd love to have you and your mother on live in 30 minutes to discuss last night's viral confrontation with Richard Whitmore. We can send a car, hair and makeup included. Maya looked at Ruth. Ruth whispered, Who is it? Maya covered the receiver. Somebody offering hair and makeup like we lost ours. Ruth closed her eyes. Hang up. Maya spoke into the phone. No interviews this morning. Maya. This is a major opportunity to control the narrative. The truth controls it fine. She hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Ruth stared at it. Is this what famous feels like? No, Maya said. This is what people do when they smell a story. Someone knocked at the apartment door. Both women went still. Maya crossed the room quietly and looked through the peephole. Eleanor Brooks stood outside, with a paper bag in one hand and a woman in a navy suit beside her. No cameras, no reporters. Maya opened the door halfway. You said morning. It is morning, Eleanor said. It feels like last night got up and put on a different shirt. Eleanor held up the bag. Breakfast helps. Ruth called from the table. If there's coffee in there, let them in. Maya opened the door. Eleanor entered first, followed by the woman in the suit. This is Angela Price. She is not related to Daniel Price, Richard's attorney. Thank God. She represents workers, whistleblowers, and people powerful men underestimate. Angela offered her hand to Maya, then to Ruth. Mrs. Williams. Miss Williams. I watched the recording. I'm sorry for what happened to you. Ruth nodded carefully. People keep saying sorry. I'm still figuring out what to do with it. Don't do anything with it yet, Angela said. Let other people be uncomfortable for once. That made Ruth like her a little. They sat around the kitchen table. Eleanor unpacked biscuits, scrambled eggs in takeout containers, fruit cups, and coffee. Ruth frowned at the spread. How much did all this cost? Eleanor said. Less than one hotel napkin at last night's gala. Ruth shook her head. That is not comforting. Angela opened a folder. I'll be direct. Richard's team is already moving. They're claiming the wager was theatrical, not binding. They're claiming the board acted under emotional pressure. They're claiming you, Maya, manipulated a public moment for personal gain. Maya almost laughed. I manipulated him into throwing a coin at my shoes? No, Angela said. But they will try to make the room forget who started the fire. Ruth's hand tightened around her coffee cup. Can they undo it? Angela looked at her, not past her. They can challenge parts of it. They can delay. They can confuse. But they cannot erase the video. The board statement. Eleanor's canceled investment, or Richard's signed acknowledgement. Your strongest weapon is not just the wager. It is the pattern. Maya leaned forward. Pattern? Yes. How he treated staff. Wage deductions. Retaliation. Unsafe workloads. Health accommodations ignored. If last night was one ugly moment, they can call it an emotional mistake. If it was the visible part of 18 years of behavior, the board has a reason to keep him out. Ruth looked down. Maya said, Mama? Ruth's voice was low. I kept things. Angela paused. What kind of things? Ruth rose slowly and went to the hallway closet. She came back with a cookie tin, the kind people keep sewing supplies in. She set it on the table and removed the lid. Inside were folded pay stubs, doctor's notes, warning slips, handwritten schedules, photographs of broken carts, and small pieces of hotel stationery with dates written in Ruth's careful hand. Maya stared. Mama. Ruth did not look proud. She looked tired. I didn't know what I was saving them for. I just knew sometimes memory needs help. Angela took one paper gently. This is a deduction for property damage. A guest broke that mirror, Ruth said. Room 812. He was drunk. I told the supervisor. 2 weeks later, it came out of my check. Angela picked up another. Doctor's note requesting lighter duty. They said if I needed lighter duty, maybe I needed fewer hours. Eleanor stopped eating. Maya's voice dropped. Why didn't you tell me all this? Ruth looked at her daughter. Because you already knew we were poor. I didn't want you knowing every way they made sure of it. The apartment went quiet. Maya reached into her pocket and took out the 50-cent coin. She placed it beside the tin. He thought this was the insult. Ruth looked at the papers. No. That was just the part he finally did in front of guests. Angela closed the folder. Mrs. Williams, with your permission, I want to copy every document in this tin. I also want statements from employees, not rumors. Specific dates, incidents, names, pay records if they have them. Maya nodded. We asked for a list. Angela turned to her. Good, but be careful. Richard will still have loyalists in management. Some people will be afraid. Some will pretend to support you and report back to him, Eleanor added. And some will try to flatter you into moving too fast. Maya looked at her. Are you warning me about yourself? Yes, Eleanor said. That too. Ruth gave a short laugh. At least she's honest. The landline rang again. Maya reached for it, but Angela held up a hand. Let it ring. After the fifth ring, it stopped. Then, Ruth's phone buzzed with a text. She read it and went pale. Maya stood. What is it? Ruth handed her the phone. The message was from an unknown number. Tell your daughter to enjoy her little show. By Friday, nobody at that hotel will admit they stood with her. Maya's face went still. Eleanor took out her phone. Forward that to Angela. Ruth whispered, It's starting. Angela's expression hardened. No, Mrs. Williams. It started years ago. Now it's leaving evidence. Maya read the message again. The threat was meant to scare them back into silence. Last night, Richard had used a coin. This morning, someone used a phone. Same lesson, different hand. She set the phone on the table and looked at Angela. What do we do first? Angela answered. We protect your mother. We preserve evidence. We build the employee record. And we do not let Richard make this about whether you deserve the hotel. We make it about whether he deserves to keep power over the people he harmed. Maya picked up Papa Sam's chipped queen and turned it once between her fingers. He said, The cameras would leave. They will, Eleanor said. Maya looked at Ruth's tin. Then we give them something that stays. By noon, the first staff statements began arriving. Not on television, not in speeches. Texts, photographs, scanned notes, voicemails from people speaking softly in break rooms and parked cars, names, dates, deductions, threats, injuries, years of quiet damage finding a place to land. Ruth listened to the first voicemail twice. A woman from laundry said, Mrs. Williams told me to write it down when they took my holiday pay. I didn't think anybody would ever read it. Maybe now somebody will. Ruth covered her mouth. Maya touched her shoulder. They trusted you before last night. Ruth looked at the tin, then at her daughter. I thought I was just surviving. Maya shook her head. No, Mama. You were keeping records for the day survival needed witnesses. By late afternoon, the story had split into two stories. One was the version playing on television. Maya Williams at a chessboard. Richard Whitmore III throwing a coin. The stunned silence. The 5-move checkmate. The canceled investment. The signed acknowledgement. News anchors loved that version because it had a clean shape. A proud man insulted the wrong woman's daughter and lost in public. The other story was quieter and much older. It came in through Ruth's phone, through Maya's email, through Angela Price's secure upload link, through folded papers carried by employees who arrived at the apartment building in baseball caps and sunglasses, afraid of being seen but more afraid of staying silent. By 3 o'clock, Maya's kitchen table could no longer hold all of it. Angela sorted documents into piles. Wage deductions here, medical accommodation issues here, retaliation here, safety complaints here. Anything involving Richard directly goes in the red folder. Ruth sat beside her, reading each name as if it belonged to someone from church. Marisol worked laundry. She had twins in college. They cut her hours after she asked about overtime. Angela wrote it down. Date? Ruth closed her eyes. September, 2 years ago, week after Labor Day. Maya looked at her mother. You remember all of that? Ruth gave her a tired look. Baby, when you are poor, dates matter. Rent is due on the 1st. Medicine runs out on the 15th. A short paycheck can ruin a whole month. Maya said nothing. There were things poverty taught that no business school ever would. Eleanor stood near the window, speaking quietly into her phone. No, I will not reconsider the investment under current leadership. No, a suspension is not enough if the culture remains the same. Yes, I am aware of the financial exposure. That is why I am not wiring money into a burning building. She ended the call and turned back to the table. That was one of the lenders. Maya looked up. And? They want stability. Ruth almost laughed. Then they should have treated people stable before the cameras came. Eleanor pointed gently at her. That is exactly the sentence they do not want on television. A knock sounded at the door. Everyone went still. Angela lifted a hand. "Let me." She checked through the peephole, then opened the door. Thomas Reed stood outside with a cardboard box under one arm and a folded newspaper in the other. "I brought lunch," he said, though at this hour it may qualify as an apology for lunch. Ruth looked at the clock. "Lord, none of us ate." Thomas set the box down on the counter. "Chicken soup, turkey sandwiches, coffee, and something called a kale salad that I distrust on principle." Ruth smiled despite herself. "You were raised right. My mother tried," Thomas said. Then he placed the newspaper on the table. The front page showed Maya and Richard across the board. The headline read, "Maid's daughter wins hotel wager after owner's public insult." Maya stared at it. "They still made it about me." Thomas nodded. "Headlines prefer faces. Evidence prefers patterns." Angela tapped the red folder. "We are building the pattern." Thomas looked at the piles of papers, and his expression sobered. "How bad?" Ruth answered before Angela could. "Worse than I let myself know." That quiet sentence changed the room more than outrage would have. Maya sat beside her mother. "Mama, you don't have to read every one." "Yes, I do." "Why?" "Because some of these women told me things when nobody else listened. If this is the first time their words are going to matter, I won't be the one to look away." Eleanor studied Ruth for a moment. "Mrs. Williams, would you be willing to speak to the board tonight?" Ruth's eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes. I clean rooms." Maya leaned forward. "You know what I'm going to say." Ruth looked at her. "Don't." Maya said it anyway. "No. You know the hotel." Thomas poured coffee into a mug and set it near Ruth. "Boards hear numbers all day. Sometimes they need someone to tell them what those numbers cost." Angela nodded. "There's an emergency board session at 7. I want both of you there by video, not in person. Too many cameras outside the hotel. Too much risk." Maya's eyes narrowed. "Risk from who?" Angela did not soften it. "Richard still has friends. Angry people do stupid things when they feel humiliated." Ruth looked toward the window. Maya touched her arm. "We can do it from here." At 6:30, Angela turned Maya's small kitchen into a command center. Eleanor's laptop sat on a stack of old mail, so the camera angle was level. Ruth changed into a clean blouse. Maya brushed her hair back, then stopped when Ruth fussed with her collar. "Mama, it's fine." "No, it isn't," Ruth said. "If they're going to stare at my baby, they can stare at a neat collar." Maya let her fix it. The screen filled at 7 with faces in small squares. Martin Hale, Patricia Lowell, 2 other directors, outside counsel, a communications advisor, and Daniel Price, sitting stiffly beside an empty chair. Richard was not visible at first. Martin cleared his throat. "Thank you for joining. Miss Williams, Mrs. Williams, Miss Price, Miss Brooks, Mr. Reed." Ruth sat very straight at the mention of her name. Angela spoke first. "Before we discuss transition, we need to address the employee record." Daniel Price leaned toward his camera. "This meeting was called to discuss last night's alleged wager, not to open a labor tribunal," Maya said. "Then you should have told Richard not to insult a laborer." Daniel's mouth tightened. "Miss Williams, emotional remarks will not help." Ruth leaned closer to the laptop. "They helped when Richard wanted people to laugh." Patricia Lowell looked down, hiding a quick expression that might have been approval. Angela began laying out the evidence. Improper deductions, ignored medical notes, retaliation after complaints, short staffing in housekeeping, broken equipment kept in use, older employees pressured to take reduced hours after reporting injuries. She did not dramatize. She read dates, names, and documents. That made it worse. Martin's face changed with every page. The communications advisor stopped taking notes and simply listened. One director whispered, "How did we not know?" Ruth answered him, "You didn't ask the people who did." The room on the screen went silent. Then Richard's face appeared as he stepped into frame behind Daniel. "This is disgusting," he said. "You're letting them turn a business matter into a grievance parade." Maya felt Ruth stiffen beside her. Richard pointed at the camera. "Ruth, after everything this hotel gave you, This is how you repay it? Ruth's hand trembled on the table, but her voice did not. This hotel gave me work. I gave it 18 years of my body. Richard rolled his eyes. Spare me. Maya leaned toward the screen. No, you're going to hear her. Richard laughed. And if I don't? Thomas Reed, seated quietly at the edge of the kitchen, spoke for the first time. Then, you will make the same mistake twice. Richard glared. I am tired of chess metaphors, Thomas said. So am I. That was not one. Martin interrupted, his voice firm. Richard, you are present as a suspended executive. You will not address Mrs. Williams with disrespect in this meeting. Richard looked stunned. You're giving me rules now? Patricia answered. Yes. That one word landed through the laptop like another signature. Angela continued. Given the documented pattern and the public misconduct, we recommend immediate employee protections, preservation of payroll records, suspension of retaliatory managers pending review, and formation of a worker advisory council chaired by Ruth Williams, if she accepts. Ruth turned to Maya in panic. Chaired? Maya whispered. Breathe. Martin looked directly at Ruth through the screen. Mrs. Williams, would you accept? Ruth did not answer right away. She looked at the tin of papers on the kitchen table, the chipped queen, the black knight, the coffee Thomas had brought, and Maya sitting beside her. Then, she faced the board. I will, Ruth said. If the council is not decoration. Martin nodded slowly. It will not be. Ruth's eyes sharpened. Put that in writing. Thomas smiled into his coffee. Richard slammed something off screen. This is insane. You are handing my hotel to a housekeeper and her daughter. Maya looked at him through the screen. No, Richard. For the first time, the people who built your comfort are being asked what it cost them. Outside, a siren passed somewhere down the street. Inside the kitchen, no one moved. Martin turned to counsel. Draft the resolution. Daniel Price objected. We reserve all rights. Angela replied. So do we. The meeting ended at 8:13. With no applause, no speeches, and no victory music. Just a written resolution in progress, a suspended owner losing allies by the minute, and Ruth Williams, sitting at her kitchen table as the newly proposed chair of a council no one in power had wanted until the truth became impossible to ignore. When the screen went dark, Ruth stared at her reflection in the laptop. Maya, she said softly, I don't know how to chair anything. Maya took her hand. You chaired survival for 18 years. Ruth looked at her daughter, then at the folders. That's not the same. No, Maya said. This time, they have to listen. The apartment was quiet after the video call ended, but it was not peaceful. The laptop screen had gone black. The folders remained open. Ruth's cookie tin sat in the center of the table, emptier now, as if giving up its secrets had left it tired too. Outside the window, the streetlights hummed over parked cars and cracked sidewalks. Inside, Maya could still hear Richard's voice through the screen. You are handing my hotel to a housekeeper and her daughter. Ruth stared at the dark laptop. He really believes that. Maya sat beside her. Believes what? That it was his hotel alone. Ruth touched one of the pay stubs on the table. Like every bed made itself. Like every towel folded itself. Like the kitchen cooked without hands and the floors shined because he signed a check. Maya picked up Papa Sam's chipped queen and turned it slowly. People like Richard think paying someone means owning the part of them that suffered. Ruth looked at her daughter. Your granddaddies say that? No, Maya said. You taught me that. Ruth's face softened, but before she could answer, Angela's phone buzzed. She read the message, and the change in her expression pulled everyone back into the fight. What is it? Maya asked. Angela looked at Eleanor first, then at Ruth. Richard's team is moving faster than expected. They've filed for a temporary injunction. They want a judge to block the board's emergency transition and stop any public release of internal employee records. Ruth's hand went to her chest. Can they do that? They can ask, Angela said. Getting it is another matter, but they're also pushing a public statement. Eleanor's phone buzzed next. She read it aloud with anger held tightly under control. Mr. Whitmore deeply regrets that a light-hearted charity gala chess challenge was misrepresented amid heightened emotions. He denies any discriminatory intent and remains committed to the employees of the Whitmore Grand. Maya laughed once. It had no humor in it. Light-hearted? Ruth's voice went quiet. He threw a coin at my child. Angela nodded. That is why they need the court filing. They want to freeze the story before the employee evidence becomes the story. Thomas Reed, who had been standing near the counter rinsing coffee mugs without being asked, dried his hands on a towel. So he is trying to move the game off the board. Angela looked at him. Exactly. Maya leaned back. Then we keep it on the board. Everyone turned toward her. She tapped the folder nearest to Ruth. Richard wants to make this about whether a wager counts. Fine. Let lawyers argue that. But the public already saw what he did. The board already saw the documents. If he wants to say he cares about employees, we make him answer Ruth's evidence. Angela studied her. We do that carefully. I know. No, Maya. Carefully means no posting documents online out of anger. No naming employees without permission. No giving reporters anything that can hurt the people helping us. Maya nodded. Then we ask people to speak for themselves. Ruth looked worried. Some of them can't. They have rent, kids, medical bills. Then I speak first, Maya said. Eleanor shook her head slightly. You've already become the face. That helps and hurts. If you speak too much, they'll say you're enjoying attention. Maya looked at Ruth. Then who? Ruth understood before anyone said it. No, she whispered. Maya's face changed. Mama, no. I am not going on television. I am not sitting under lights while strangers ask me how it felt to be humiliated. I know how it felt. I don't need to perform it for them, Angela said gently. Mrs. Williams, you don't have to. Ruth stood, suddenly restless. Good, because I won't. I kept my head down for 18 years. Last night I lifted it. That does not mean I know how to carry the whole building on my back. Maya rose too. Nobody is asking you to carry it alone. Ruth turned on her, not angry, but frightened in a way Maya had not seen since she was a child, and the rent notice came under the door. Yes, they are. You are. The staff is. The reporters are. The board is. Everybody heard my name once, and now suddenly I am supposed to be brave every hour of the day. The room went still. Maya absorbed it. She had been so focused on defending Ruth that she had not stopped to see what defense might demand from her. I'm sorry, Maya said. Ruth looked away. Maya stepped closer, her voice lower. I didn't mean to push you into another kind of work. Ruth's shoulders dropped. I know. I just don't want them to bury what they did. Neither do I, Ruth said. But baby, I am tired. That sentence did more than stop Maya. It instructed her. Thomas spoke softly from the counter. There is another way. Angela turned. What are you thinking? Thomas came back to the table. Last night, everyone understood the chessboard, because the final position could be shown. No speech needed. Perhaps the employee record needs the same thing. A clean position, not a flood. Eleanor nodded slowly. A limited public statement. Ruth doesn't do a full interview. She releases a written statement with Angela. 3 examples, documented, with names withheld unless employees consent, Angela said. And a demand. Independent audit. Anti-retaliation protections. Worker council. Medical accommodation review. Maya looked at Ruth. You wouldn't have to sit under lights. Ruth sank back into the chair. I can write better than I can talk when I'm scared. Maya almost smiled. I know. Your grocery lists sound like court orders. Ruth gave her a look, but the tension eased. Angela pulled a legal pad close. Mrs. Williams, we can write it together. Your words, my structure. Ruth stared at the blank page. How do I start? For a moment, no one answered. Then Maya picked up Ruth's name tag from the table. It had been removed from her uniform and placed beside the folders. Ruth W. The plastic was scratched at the edges. Maya set it in front of her mother. Start with your name. Ruth looked at it for a long time. Then she nodded. Angela uncapped her pen. Ruth spoke slowly at first. My name is Ruth Williams. I worked at the Whitmore Grand for 18 years. Angela wrote. Ruth continued, stronger. Last night was not the beginning of disrespect in that hotel. It was the first time enough people watched it happen. Maya felt the words settle into the room. Eleanor said, "That's the opening." Ruth looked at Angela. "Write this too. I do not want revenge. Revenge is too small for what working people are owed. I want records opened. I want pay corrected. I want sick workers protected. I want managers who punished honesty removed. I want every employee called by their name." Angela kept writing, but her eyes lifted once at that last line. Thomas said, "Mrs. Williams, may I suggest one sentence?" Ruth looked at him. "You may. Say that dignity is not a benefit granted by management." Ruth thought about it, then shook her head. "No, that sounds like you." Thomas smiled. "Fair." Ruth leaned over the page. "Write this instead. A paycheck pays for labor. It does not buy the right to shame the person doing it." Maya whispered, "Mama." Ruth kept her eyes on the page. "Too much?" Angela said, "No. Exactly enough." By 10 that night, the statement was finished. It was not long. It did not shout. It named no employee without consent. It gave 3 documented examples and called for an independent review. It rejected Richard's version without repeating his excuses. It ended with Ruth's full name. Angela read the final paragraph aloud. "I do not ask anyone to hate Richard Whitmore. Hate will not fix payroll records, repair broken carts, or protect the next woman whose hands shake from work. I ask only that the truth be written down and acted on. My name is Ruth Williams. I was not invisible. I was ignored." No one spoke for a moment. Ruth wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. "Send it." Angela looked at Maya. Maya looked at Eleanor. Eleanor nodded. The statement went out at 10:17 p.m. At 10:23, the first reporter reposted it. At 10:31, a former employee replied with her own story. At 10:44, a retired bellman wrote, "Ruth Williams trained half that hotel in how to keep going." By 11:05, the hashtag was no longer about the chess game. It was about Ruth's name. Maya sat beside her mother and watched the screen fill with people who had finally found words because Ruth had given them permission. Ruth shook her head in disbelief. "I thought I was just one woman." Maya took her hand. "You were. That's why they believed you." Near midnight, Angela's phone buzzed again. She read the message and looked up. "What now?" Eleanor asked. Angela's voice was calm, but her eyes were bright. "The judge denied Richard's emergency request to block the board transition tonight. Hearing scheduled for next week. Until then, the suspension stands." Ruth closed her eyes. Maya picked up the 50-cent coin and placed it beside the name tag. For the first time since the night began, the 2 objects did not look like insult and survival. They looked like evidence and answer. Thomas Reed looked at Maya. "Still think it was only 5 moves?" Maya looked at Ruth's statement spreading across the country. "No," she said. "That was just the opening." By morning, Ruth Williams's statement had traveled farther than the chess clip. The video had made people gasp. The statement made them remember. It moved through union pages, church groups, hotel workers' forums, local news, retired employees' Facebook accounts, and family group chats where people over 45 did not use many emojis, but knew exactly what it meant to work until your body asked you to stop and your bills said no. Maya woke to the sound of Ruth's phone buzzing against the kitchen table. Ruth was already awake, sitting in her robe, reading comments with the careful expression of someone holding something hot. "Mama," Maya said from the hallway, "you slept in that chair?" Ruth looked up. "I rested. That is not the same. It is when you are my age." Maya walked over and gently took the phone from her hand. "No more reading for 10 minutes. Ruth reached for it. A woman from Alabama wrote that her husband worked maintenance at a hotel for 22 years and never got his overtime corrected. "Mama." And a man from Ohio said his mother cried when she read my statement. "Mama." Ruth stopped. "What?" "You are allowed to eat breakfast before carrying the whole country." Ruth leaned back, tired, but smiling. "I don't know how to do that yet." Maya set a bowl of oatmeal in front of her. "Practice." Before Ruth could argue, Angela Price called. Maya put the phone on speaker. "Good morning," Angela said. "I'll be brief because I know everyone has tried to reach you. Richard's injunction was denied for now. The board's emergency suspension stands until next week's hearing. The bad news is, Richard's attorneys are preparing a full challenge. The worst news is his media team is trying to paint Maya as opportunistic and Ruth as confused. Ruth put down her spoon. Confused? Maya's voice cooled. They should pick a smarter lie. Angela continued. They're arguing you were overwhelmed, Mrs. Williams, and that activist lawyers are using you. Ruth looked at Maya. I have been called tired, slow, emotional, and now confused. That man really is running out of shelves to put me on. Maya almost laughed. Angela said, the board wants you both at the hotel today for a closed employee listening session. No public audience, no reporters inside. Eleanor will be there. Thomas offered to come as well. Ruth frowned. Why, Thomas? Because, Thomas Reed's voice cut in from another line. People behave better around a man who remembers exact positions. Maya looked at the phone. Were you already on this call? I am old, Miss Williams. Not useless. Ruth shook her head. Lord, this day. Angela spoke again. You do not have to attend. But if you do, it helps establish that the transition is not just symbolic. It shows employees can speak safely. Maya looked at Ruth. Your call. Ruth stared at the oatmeal, then at her phone, then at the cookie tin still on the counter. If people are brave enough to come, I can be brave enough to sit in a chair. Maya nodded. Then we go. At 10:30, Eleanor's driver pulled up outside their apartment. This time, Ruth wore a navy dress and comfortable shoes. Maya wore a plain blouse, dark pants, and Papa Sam's chipped queen in her pocket. The 50-cent coin was in the other pocket. She did not want it, but she wanted to remember. When the sedan reached the Whitmore Grand, there were cameras across the street, but security kept the entrance clear. For the first time in her life, Ruth Williams walked into the hotel through the front doors in daylight. The lobby went still. Not banquet hall still. Worker still. The kind of silence that comes when people who have been texting all morning suddenly see the person they were texting about. A front desk clerk stepped out from behind the counter. Good morning, Mrs. Williams. Ruth blinked. A bellman near the entrance said, Morning, Mrs. Williams. Then a housekeeper by the hall. Mrs. Williams. Ruth's hand went to her chest. Maya whispered, Breathe. Ruth whispered back, I am trying not to cry in the lobby. Maya said, You can cry wherever you want now. The listening session was held in a conference room that had once been reserved for corporate meetings and vendor presentations. Today, folding chairs filled the space. Housekeepers, cooks, laundry workers, maintenance staff, valet attendants, front desk clerks, and security officers sat together. Some were still in uniform. Some had come in on their day off. A few looked ready to leave if the wrong manager walked in. Martin Hale stood at the front with Patricia Lowell. Angela sat beside Maya and Ruth. Eleanor stood near the wall. Thomas Reed chose a chair near the back, quiet but visible. Martin cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming. This session is confidential. No employee will be punished for speaking. A laundry worker raised her hand. Who says? Martin hesitated. The board. She looked at Ruth. Mrs. Williams? Ruth stood slowly. I say we are going to write down everything said here. I say nobody speaks alone. I say if one person gets punished for telling the truth, we all know it. That did more than Martin's promise. The first person to speak was a maintenance man named Earl. He had worked at the hotel for 14 years. He described a boiler problem, reported 6 times, and marked resolved twice when it had not been fixed. Then came Teresa from housekeeping, who said carts were overloaded after staffing cuts. Then Luis, the young server from the gala, who admitted tips from private events had been pooled strangely for months. Patricia took notes. Angela asked for dates. Eleanor asked what documents existed. Ruth asked questions no lawyer would have known to ask. Was that before or after they changed the supply closet lock? Who was supervisor on the 3rd floor that week? Did they make you sign the short break form? Each time, employees looked at her with fresh respect. Ruth had not just suffered there. She had mapped the place. Halfway through, the door opened. Richard Whitmore walked in. The room turned cold. He wore a dark suit and a controlled expression, with Daniel Price behind him. Security stepped forward, but Richard raised both hands. Relax. I am not here to interrupt. I am here to observe what is still legally my company. Martin stood. Richard, you are suspended from executive authority and not permitted in this session, Daniel said. My client has the right to monitor proceedings that affect his interests. Angela stood too. Your client has the right to wait outside while employees discuss retaliation concerns, without the alleged retaliator in the room. Richard ignored her and looked at the staff. You are all being used. Do you think this girl can protect your jobs when the lenders come? Do you think Ruth Williams can sign payroll? Do you think hashtags keep hotels open? No one answered. Richard smiled slightly, thinking silence had returned to him. Then Earl, the maintenance man, stood. No, but you didn't keep it open either. We did. Richard's smile faded. Teresa stood next. And Ruth knows more about keeping this place running than you ever asked. Louis stood too. You told us to treat guests like they mattered. You never thought that rule applied to us. One by one, people rose. Not all of them. Enough. Ruth remained seated, staring at Richard with tears in her eyes and steel in her back. Richard pointed toward them. You will regret this. Maya stood then. No, she said. That sentence belongs to you. Daniel put a hand on Richard's arm. We should go. Richard looked at Maya, then at Ruth, then at the room that had once lowered its eyes for him. He left without another word. The door closed. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Ruth turned back to the employees. Now, she said, voice steady. Where were we? Earl sat down first. Teresa followed. The room settled again. Not into fear, but into work. Maya watched her mother pick up a pen and write the next name on the list. A day earlier, Ruth Williams had been begging not to lose her job. Now, the people who kept the hotel alive were waiting for her to continue. And for once, no one in the room mistook silence for weakness. The listening session lasted 3 hours longer than anyone planned. By the time the last employee spoke, the conference room had stopped feeling like a meeting and started feeling like a place where years had been unpacked and left on the table. Names filled Patricia's notes. Dates filled Angela's folders. Broken equipment. Missing overtime. Ignored injuries. Shifted blame. Quiet threats. And managers who smiled upstairs while pressing people down below. Ruth wrote until her fingers cramped. Maya noticed and slid a fresh pen toward her. Mama, take a break. Ruth did not look up. People waited years to say this. My hand can wait 10 minutes. Angela heard that and paused her own writing. Mrs. Williams. That sentence belongs in the record. Ruth gave her a tired look. Everything does, Miss Price. That's the problem. Martin Hale stood near the wall, pale and silent. He had come into the session expecting complaints. He had not expected a map of neglect so detailed that every corner of the hotel seemed to have a witness. When the final employee, a night auditor named Brenda, finished describing how she had been told not to report a guest assault because the guest was too valuable, Martin closed his eyes. Eleanor looked at him. Still, think this is a public relations issue? Martin opened his eyes slowly. No. Good, she said. Because public relations cannot repair rot. It can only perfume it. Maya watched Martin absorb that. He was not Richard. That did not make him innocent. It only meant he had mistaken distance for cleanliness. Angela gathered the papers into folders. Here is what happens next. We preserve payroll records. We request surveillance logs where available. We take signed statements from anyone willing. No one is pressured. No one is named publicly without consent. Retaliation gets reported directly to me. A cook raised his hand. And if our supervisor is the one retaliating? Ruth answered before Angela could. Then you call me too. The man looked surprised. You? Ruth sat straighter. Yes, me. I know how supervisors talk when they think nobody important is listening. A few employees nodded. Some smiled. The room had started to understand something Maya had always known. Ruth Williams did not need a title to have authority. She had earned it. One cleaned room, one covered shift, one remembered name at a time. Patricia stepped forward. The board will vote this afternoon on temporary protections for all staff who participated today. Earl crossed his arms. Temporary? Patricia accepted the challenge. Temporary, until permanent policy is drafted. Earl looked at Ruth. Ruth looked at Patricia. Put deadlines on it. Patricia nodded. 30 days for draft policy. 7 days for anti-retaliation notice. Immediate suspension of any manager credibly accused of intimidation during the review. Angela said. Credibly accused needs definition. Patricia wrote it down. Agreed. Maya listened carefully. The words were dry, but she understood their weight. Policy was not applause. It was whether Teresa's cart got lighter, whether Luis got his tips, whether Earl's boiler reports were read before someone got hurt, whether Ruth could say she was in pain without being punished for having a body. When the session ended, employees did not rush out. They came to Ruth one by one. Thank you, Mrs. Williams. You remember when you covered my floor after my surgery? I never forgot. My mama saw you on the news. She said tell you she's proud. Ruth kept saying, thank you, baby. And, we'll see it through. And, write it down. Until Maya thought those might become the first rules of the new hotel. Thomas Reed waited by the door. Maya walked over to him. You were quiet today, she said. I try not to speak when people who know more than I do are talking. You knew plenty last night. Last night was chess. And today? Thomas looked toward Ruth. Today was courage with paperwork. Maya glanced back at the table. That sounds harder. It is, he said. In chess, the board is honest. People require documentation. Before Maya could answer, Patricia called her over. Maya, the board needs to meet privately. Eleanor, Angela, and Thomas can remain if you want them. Ruth too, of course. Ruth heard her name and frowned. Of course, Patricia corrected herself. Mrs. Williams, we would like you to remain. Ruth nodded. Better. The employees left slowly, and the conference room became smaller, with only the board, council, Eleanor, Angela, Thomas, Ruth, and Maya. Martin took the head of the table, then looked at Maya and seemed to reconsider. He moved one chair over. You can sit there, he said. Maya looked at the empty head chair. No. Martin blinked. No? I don't need Richard's chair to speak. Ruth's mouth tightened in approval. Maya sat beside her mother. Let's work. Martin folded his hands. The first order is formalizing the emergency transition until the hearing. Council advises that while last night's wager may face legal challenge, Richard's signed acknowledgement, public conduct, and the employee evidence support his continued suspension. Angela added, and Maya's recognition in the transition. Daniel Price was not present, but one of the board's lawyers looked uncomfortable. Recognition? Yes. Operational authority is more complicated, Maya said. I'm not asking to approve payroll by dinner. Eleanor leaned back. Then what are you asking? Maya looked at Ruth. Then, at the folders. 3 things today. 1. No retaliation. Written, posted, sent to every employee. 2. Ruth chairs the worker council with real access to the board. 3. The employee review is independent, not handled by managers who may be part of the problem. Martin nodded slowly. Those are reasonable. Maya held his gaze. Reasonable things get delayed all the time, Patricia said. Not this time. Put dates on it, Ruth said again. Patricia smiled faintly. 7 days. 30 days. Independent reviewer. Named within 48 hours. Angela wrote it down. And preservation of records effective immediately. The board's lawyer nodded. Yes. Thomas Reed raised a finger. May an old chess player ask a business question? Martin looked relieved by the change of tone. Please, who is responsible for making sure the hotel runs tonight? A silence followed. Maya looked around the table. That matters more than statements, Patricia answered. General Manager Collins is still in place. Ruth's eyes sharpened. Mr. Collins ignored half of what people said today. Martin looked to Patricia. Patricia did not defend Collins. Then we need an interim operations lead, Eleanor said. Someone experienced, not loyal to Richard, known to staff. Ruth leaned back. Diane Mercer. Martin frowned. Banquet operations? She knows scheduling, vendors, staffing, guest complaints. And she doesn't lie when a room isn't ready, Ruth said. People respect her. Patricia nodded. Diane is competent, Maya said. Then call her. Martin hesitated. This is unusual. Ruth looked at him. So was last night. That settled it. Within 20 minutes, Diane Mercer joined by phone and accepted interim operations authority with one condition. I want Ruth Williams in every morning briefing. Ruth nearly dropped her pen. Diane, I'm not management. Diane's voice came through the speaker. No. You're the reason half my team still trusts this place. Be there at 8. Maya smiled for the first time all day. The board voted. The protections passed. Richard's suspension remained. Diane Mercer became interim operations lead. Ruth Williams became chair of the Worker Advisory Council. An independent review would begin within 48 hours. No music played. No crowd applauded. But when Patricia printed the resolution and placed it on the table, Maya felt the shape of something firmer than victory. Ruth touched the page with one finger. That's real? Angela said. It is now. Martin looked at Ruth. Mrs. Williams, I owe you an apology. Ruth met his eyes. You owe people action. Start there. Martin nodded. We will. As the meeting broke, Maya walked back to the chess table still set from last night. The black knight remained where Thomas had restored it. The 50-cent coin was not there anymore. It was in her pocket, heavy for something so small. Thomas came to stand beside her. You won again today. Maya shook her head. Nobody lost today except the lie. Thomas smiled. That is often the best kind of win. Ruth called from the doorway. Maya, come on. Diane says I have a briefing at 8, and apparently, I need a notebook. Maya turned. You already have one. Ruth lifted her chin. Then, I need a better one. Maya laughed, and the sound surprised her. For the first time since Richard tossed the coin, the future did not look simple. It looked crowded, difficult, and full of work, but it no longer looked locked. By 8 the next morning, Ruth Williams arrived at the hotel carrying a new notebook, 2 pens, and the uneasy expression of a woman who had agreed to step into history before she had figured out where to put her purse. Maya walked beside her through the front entrance. The cameras were still across the street, but they were farther back now. Security had set clear boundaries, and for once, those boundaries protected Ruth instead of keeping her out of sight. At the lobby desk, the clerk looked up. Good morning, Mrs. Williams. Miss Williams. Ruth stopped for half a second. Maya felt it. The old instinct to answer softly, to move quickly, to get out of the way. Then Ruth nodded. Good morning, Denise, she said. The clerk smiled. You remembered. Ruth gave her a look. Baby, I remember everybody. The first morning briefing was held in a small operations room behind the lobby. Diane Mercer stood at the head of the table with a tablet, a stack of schedules, and the face of a woman who had not slept enough but had decided sleep could wait. Around her sat department leads: housekeeping, laundry, maintenance, food service, front desk, security, and banquets. Martin Hale and Patricia Lowell joined from the board. Angela Price sat beside Maya. Thomas Reed stood in the back with coffee, claiming he was only there because old men enjoy watching consequences organize themselves. Diane began without ceremony. Richard Whitmore is suspended. I am interim operations lead. Ruth Williams chairs the Worker Advisory Council. No retaliation means no retaliation. If I hear that anyone threatened, punished, rescheduled, isolated, or mocked an employee for speaking yesterday, that manager is done pending review. Questions. A housekeeping supervisor named Linda shifted in her chair. Some employees are refusing assignments. Ruth looked up. Refusing unsafe carts or refusing work? Linda's mouth tightened. They're saying carts are overloaded. They are, Ruth said. Diane turned to maintenance. How many working carts do we have? Earl answered. Working safely? 12. On paper? 21. Diane wrote that down. Then we schedule by 12. until we repair or replace the rest. Linda protested. That will slow room turnover. Ruth opened her notebook. Better slow than injured. Diane nodded. Agreed. Maya watched the room adjust. Not everyone liked Ruth having a voice. That was clear. But they answered her. They had to. She knew too much to dismiss. A front desk manager asked, "What do we say to guests asking about the video?" Diane replied, "We say the hotel is under emergency transition and remains open. We do not discuss employees' private matters. We do not defend Mr. Whitmore. We do not blame Miss Williams or Mrs. Williams for the attention," Maya said. "And if a guest insults staff?" Diane looked at security. "They get warned once. Then removed." The security manager nodded. "Understood." Ruth wrote that down slowly, as if she wanted proof the sentence had existed. After the briefing, employees lined up outside the operations room with notes, questions, and fears. Some wanted to know if pay would be corrected. Some wanted to know if Richard could return. Some only wanted to shake Ruth's hand. A gray-haired bellman named Arthur took off his cap when he approached. "Mrs. Williams, I've worked doors here 29 years. I should have spoken up last year when they cut housekeeping breaks. I didn't." Ruth looked at him. "Can you speak now?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Then start there." By noon, the independent reviewer had been selected. By 2, payroll preservation notices went out. By 3, Diane suspended 2 supervisors pending investigation after 3 separate employees reported threats from the previous night. By 4, Richard's lawyer filed another statement, claiming the hotel was being run by emotion, spectacle, and outside pressure. Eleanor read the line aloud in the conference room and snorted. That is rich from a man who bet corporate control because a 19-year-old hurt his feelings. Maya sat at the table with Angela, reviewing the transition language. Can he win? Next week? Angela did not give comfort without truth. He can win pieces. Maybe the court limits what the wager means legally. Maybe the board's authority is challenged. Maybe he gets a hearing on process. But the suspension has separate grounds now. Misconduct, investor withdrawal, employee record, reputational harm. He is fighting on more than one front. Thomas, sitting near the window, said, "That happens when a man opens too many lines against himself." Maya looked at him. "You said you'd stop with the chess lessons." "I said no such thing. I said I would keep quiet about hotels." Ruth entered with Diane, carrying her notebook like it had become part of her uniform. "We have a problem." Maya stood. "What happened?" "Richard is outside." Angela immediately reached for her phone. "Where?" "Across the street," Diane said. "Press is around him. He is giving a statement." They moved to the lobby windows. Richard stood beyond the security line, flanked by Daniel Price. Cameras surrounded him. He looked rested, groomed, and angry in a polished way. A reporter's voice carried faintly through the glass. "Mr. Whitmore, do you regret your comments to Ruth and Maya Williams?" Richard paused for effect. "I regret that a family disagreement within our hotel community has been exploited by people who do not understand the responsibilities of ownership." Ruth's face went still. Maya's eyes narrowed. "Family disagreement?" Angela said. "He wants to sound paternal, like he was the head of a household correcting people." Richard continued outside. "I have always cared for my employees, but care does not mean surrendering a century-old institution to a moment of emotional theater." Maya moved toward the door. Ruth caught her arm. "No, he's lying." "Yes," Ruth said. "And he wants you angry on camera." Maya stopped. Ruth looked through the window at Richard. "Let him talk." Maya turned to her. "You sure?" Ruth nodded. "He sounds smaller every time he explains himself." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Mrs. Williams, that is media strategy." "No," Ruth said. "That is raising a child. When somebody keeps adding words to an excuse, the truth is usually standing behind them with its arms folded." Thomas laughed softly. "I may write that down." Outside, a reporter asked, "Mr. Whitmore, why did you throw the coin?" Richard's face tightened. For the first time, his prepared statement failed him. Inside, the lobby staff had gathered silently behind Maya and Ruth. Richard said, It has been taken out of context. Denise at the front desk whispered, "What context makes that better?" No one answered because no answer existed. Then a second reporter called, "If you cared for Ruth Williams, why didn't you know her full name until the video went viral?" Richard's mouth opened, but nothing came out quickly enough. That pause traveled. Maya felt Ruth's hand settle into hers. The phones inside the lobby began buzzing. Clips of Richard's failed answer were already spreading. Martin Hale came down from the elevators, watching his own phone. "Counsel says we should issue no new statement. The last one is holding." Ruth looked at him. "Good. Sometimes quiet lets a lie hear itself." Richard's press conference ended badly. He left without taking more questions, followed by reporters shouting his name. The hotel lobby remained still until he was gone. Then Diane turned to the staff. "Back to work. Not because he said so. Because we have guests, and because our work belongs to us, before it belongs to any owner." People moved. That sentence did what Richard's orders never had. It gave work back its dignity. Near evening, Maya and Ruth returned to the conference room. The first official anti-retaliation notice had been printed and posted in staff areas. Ruth insisted on walking to each one herself. Laundry, kitchen, maintenance, housekeeping, employee entrance, break room. At the last notice board, an older dishwasher named Calvin read the paper twice. "Mrs. Williams, is this real?" Ruth looked at the notice, then at him. "It is written down." Calvin frowned. "Written down don't always mean real." Ruth nodded. "No, but it gives us something to point to when they pretend they never said it." Maya stood beside her mother, thinking of the coin, the signature, the statement, the names, the folders, the board position Thomas had restored after Richard tried to scatter the pieces. That was what they were doing now, restoring the position, one document at a time. As they stepped back into the hallway, Maya's phone buzzed. A message from Angela. Hearing moved up. "Friday morning." Ruth read it over Maya's shoulder. "Friday," Ruth said. Maya slipped the phone into her pocket. "Then we have 2 days." Ruth lifted her notebook. "Then, we better not waste them." Maya looked at her mother, standing in the hallway of a hotel that had once tried to make her invisible, now carrying a notebook full of names no one could ignore. "No," Maya said. "We won't." Friday morning arrived with rain on the hotel windows and a line of reporters across the street. Maya stood in the conference room beside Ruth. Angela Price, Eleanor Brooks, Martin Hale, Patricia Lowell, Diane Mercer, and Thomas Reed. The court hearing was being held by video, but the pressure in the room felt physical. On the table lay everything they had gathered in 2 days. Ruth's statement, the signed acknowledgement, the board resolution, payroll records, employee declarations, photos of broken carts, doctor's notes, and the video transcript of Richard tossing the 50-cent coin. Ruth looked at the folders and whispered, "All that from one night." Maya shook her head. "No, all that from 18 years. One night just opened the drawer." Angela looked up from her laptop. "Remember, today is not about proving every harm. Today is about whether Richard gets control back before the full review." Ruth nodded. "And if he does?" Angela did not lie. "Then we fight from a harder place." Maya reached into her pocket and touched Papa Sam's chipped queen. In the other pocket was the coin. She had carried both all week. One to remember who taught her, one to remember who tried to price her. The judge appeared on the screen at 9 sharp. Richard sat in a separate video window beside Daniel Price. He looked less polished than he had at the press conference. His eyes were tired, but his anger had not softened. Daniel spoke first, arguing that Richard's words were theatrical, that the board had panicked under public pressure, that Maya had no operational experience, and that a century-old hotel could not be thrown into chaos because of what he called a regrettable social moment. Angela waited until he finished. Then she said, "Your Honor, a man who publicly humiliates an employee's family, wagers control of the hotel in front of cameras, loses, signs an acknowledgement, attempts to deny it, and then faces documented evidence of long-term workplace misconduct, is not being removed because of theater. He is being removed because the board finally saw the risk clearly. Daniel objected. The judge told him to wait. Angela continued. The transition is temporary. The review is independent. Payroll is preserved. Anti-retaliation protections are posted. Operations are being handled by Diane Mercer, an experienced manager. Ruth Williams chairs an advisory council because employees trust her. Maya Williams is recognized because Richard Whitmore made a public wager and signed an acknowledgement after losing it. The board did not create the crisis. Richard did. The judge looked toward Richard's window. Mr. Whitmore, did you make the statement attributed to you regarding control of the hotel? Richard's jaw moved. It was not intended as a legal transfer. That was not my question. Daniel leaned in. Your Honor, the judge raised a hand. Mr. Whitmore can answer. Richard looked as though every camera from that night had returned. Yes, he said finally. I said it. And, did you sign the acknowledgement? After the game? Richard's face darkened. Under pressure. The judge looked at the document on screen. From whom? Richard did not answer quickly enough. Maya felt Ruth's hand find hers under the table. The judge reviewed the emergency board authority, the public statement, the employee protections, and the temporary nature of the transition. Then, he gave his ruling. Richard's request to immediately restore his executive control was denied. The board's emergency suspension would remain in effect pending full review. Records preservation would continue. Anti-retaliation protections would remain enforceable. Any attempt to intimidate employees involved in the review would be considered relevant at the next hearing. Ruth closed her eyes. Maya exhaled. Richard leaned toward his camera. Your Honor, this is my family's hotel. The judge looked at him for a long second. Then you should have treated it, and the people inside it, with more care. The screen went quiet after the hearing ended. No one cheered. Not at first. Victory felt too heavy for noise. Then Diane Mercer said, We have a hotel to run. Ruth opened her eyes. And a council meeting at 2. Maya looked at her mother. You remembered. Ruth lifted her notebook. Baby, I bought the good one. I'm using every page. By afternoon, the news broke across every channel that Richard had lost the first court challenge. The hotel did not collapse. Guests checked in. Rooms were cleaned with safer carts. Maintenance orders were reviewed in public logs. Payroll questions were assigned case numbers. It was not perfect. It was not healed. But for the first time, the people doing the work could point to something written down and say, This includes us. 3 months later, the independent review confirmed enough of the employee claims that Richard Whitmore III was permanently removed from executive control. The board restructured leadership. Diane stayed as operations head. Ruth Williams remained chair of the Worker Advisory Council, refusing every fancy title anyone tried to give her. I don't need a title that makes people nervous, she told Maya. I need one that makes them answer the phone. Eleanor returned to the table with a revised investment agreement. Smaller than the first, stricter than the first, and tied to worker protections the old hotel would never have accepted. Maya read the summary twice. So the money comes only if the reforms stay? Eleanor nodded. That is the idea. Maya looked at Ruth. Ruth looked at Angela. Angela said, It is not perfect, but it has teeth. Thomas Reed, sitting nearby with coffee, said, Teeth are useful. Maya signed only after Ruth signed as witness. 1 year later, the room where Richard's private chess table had once been kept behind a rope was open to employees, families, retirees, and young adults from the neighborhood. A brass plaque by the door read, The Williams Room, for every worker who was seen too late, and every voice that refused to stay buried. Maya did not love the name at first. Ruth did. That ended the argument. On the first anniversary of the night, Richard threw the coin. Maya sat at a chessboard across from a 19-year-old black woman named Alana, whose mother worked in laundry. Alana had come in wearing a fast food uniform under her coat, her hair pulled back, her eyes full of the guarded doubt Maya recognized too well. I'm not sure I belong here, Alana said. Maya reached into her pocket and placed the 50-cent coin on the table. Alana frowned. What's that? Someone used this to tell me what I was worth. Alana looked from the coin to Maya. "What did you do?" "I didn't pick it up," Maya said. "I made the next move." Alana touched the edge of the board. "What if I lose?" Maya slid a knight toward her. "Losing a game does not lower your value. Believing the person who threw the coin does." Alana was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up the knight. "Which way does this one move?" Maya smiled. "Not the way people expect." Across the room, Ruth stood with a clipboard, correcting a delivery invoice while reminding a supervisor that break times were not suggestions. Thomas Reed was teaching two retirees, an endgame near the window. Eleanor was arguing with Martin Hale about the next scholarship fund. Diane Mercer walked through with a radio clipped to her belt, running the hotel without shouting at anyone. The place was still a hotel. Guests still complained. Pipes still leaked. Payroll still required attention. Justice had not turned life easy. It had only made lies harder to maintain. Alana moved the knight wrong the first time. Maya gently reset it. "Try again." Alana looked embarrassed. "Sorry. Don't apologize for learning." The young woman nodded and tried again. This time, the knight landed correctly. Maya tapped the board once. "Good. Now let the board hear you." Ruth looked over then, and for a moment Maya saw the whole road behind them. The coin, the cameras, the 5 moves, the signed paper, the name tag, the notebook, the hearing, the long work after the applause ended. None of it had been simple. None of it had been given. Richard Whitmore had believed everything had a price because he had spent his life surrounded by people afraid to tell him no. He had thrown 50 cents at Maya's shoes and thought he was measuring her. He had only measured himself, and Maya Williams learned something that night, which no court ruling, no headline, and no hotel deed could improve upon. Dignity is not something you pick up from the floor. It is something you refuse to drop. The lesson of Maya Williams's story is simple, but powerful. Never let a cruel person decide what you are worth. Some people will try to measure your dignity with money, your future with your background, and your voice with the job title they place on your family. But real value is not given by the powerful. It is revealed when you refuse to bow to injustice. Maya did not win because she shouted the loudest. She won because she stayed calm, trusted what she had been taught, and let the truth make its move. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of this story. If it touched your heart, please let us know what you think about the way this story was told. Your feedback helps this channel improve every episode. And if you have a powerful true story, a family memory, or an inspiring experience about justice, courage, kindness, or someone who was underestimated but rose above it, please share it with us. Your story might become the next one we tell. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.